Good afternoon, everyone. Oh, there we are. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our first concurrent session before our webinar begins. Thank you so much for joining us today. And our first session is Flex to Success, a retrospective on liberalizing the learning experience during a pandemic. Our presenter today is Dr. David Chaplin. Dr. David Chaplin is professor of economics at Northwest Nazarene University in Nampa, Idaho. He has taught economics at the college and university level for 30 years, and his primary fields of research are sports economics and economic education. If you have any questions for the presenters during the session, please feel free to enter those into the Q&A section at the bottom of the Zoom room screen, and we will address them at the end of the talk. And on that note, I will hand it over to our presenter, Dr. David Chaplin.
Hello, thanks, Daisy. You can hear me okay?
Can hear you great, thank you.
Okay, excellent, thanks. I'll do the share screen in just a moment if you're ready for that and get the presentation up. Did you have any questions before that? No. Okay, I'll go ahead and get that started here. Okay, can you see that? I'm getting this PowerPoint set up.
I can see everything great. You'll just need to do the presenter mode and you'll be good to go.
Oh, okay. I'm just missing something here on the presenter mode. Sorry, got to figure out where that is. So, okay. Okay, let me do slideshow, play from start. Okay. Hopefully does that work better?
That looks great. Thank you.
Oh, okay. So thanks. Oh, sorry, I'm getting everything sorted here. So sorry for the choppy start there, but this is my title, as you can see. I was inspired to do this because we had a real life lab experience there during the pandemic. So we went to virtual learning in March of 2020, March 7th to be exact, and finished the semester off that way. And then we've done either hybrid or face-to-face ever since. So I'll talk about that more in just a moment. I don't want to spend too much time on each slide because I want to give some time for questions as well. So, but let me set the table here. I think one thing I realized during the pandemic was I had to kind of let go, of my traditional way of thinking about the classroom experience. I teach at a small liberal arts university, and so the face-to-face experience is really important. It's a residential university as well. So I had to change my mode of thinking there and relax a little bit, essentially, as time went on. So sorry about the phone in the background. Hopefully you'll get that there. One thing I did is I got rid of the formal attendance policy. Sorry about that. I skipped one of the elements. I got rid of the formal attendance policy. I reduced or eliminated group work. I used to have personal response systems, the clickers, to encourage attendance live, that kind of thing. I got rid of that as a requirement as time went on. I'll talk about that more a little bit later. And then I imposed tighter time constraints for online exams and efforts to make questions more difficult to look up online. So to limit what we call searchability, I had to get really creative in some of the wording of that. Check what was Googleable or not, that type of thing. So that was an important element of how I refined my teaching. Okay. For the professor, I think, sorry about that, I keep skipping a little bit there. For the professor, I think one of the important elements was to resist presenteeism, that notion that just being there is good enough. So it really made me think outside the box in that way, and to create a more robust learning experience, even when we could not be face to face. I think the crackdown on potential cheating and limiting searchability actually allowed students to flourish more, because it kind of forced them to think outside the box sometimes, to answer questions, to make connections with things they may have not have ever thought of making connections on in the past. I think making it very clear that you're accessible was really important, especially that spring semester of 2020. And then for me, and again, everybody's in a different situation, but I found it worth it to outsource some of the more mundane tasks where I could, even though it did indeed come out of my own pocket for teaching assistant support. Would have been nice to get departmental help there, wasn't the case. So I dipped into my own pocket, and it did help in saving my sanity for sure. Okay. For the administrator, and I think our administration did a pretty good job with this. They were flexible with the faculty. There's that old expression of the M&Ms, the meetings and the managers really killing productivity at work. And so I think in some intuitive sense, they got that. So that was important. I would encourage them to focus on outcomes rather than just traditional inputs, in the sense of the face-to-face experience being prioritized above all else. Support staff's really important to help from faculty feeling overwhelmed, particularly just in terms of tech support could be one example of that. In the College of Business where I teach, we were pretty savvy with online teaching, but a lot of departments were not on campus. And so that was a big adjustment. And, the staff the administration rather, needed to really provide that support staff. And they did a pretty good job, to be fair, on that. I do think administrations, in some cases, I've heard many stories of this, made the pass-fail option too much of an easy out for those, because as you'll see in a moment, my students functioned pretty well during the pandemic in terms of academic performance. I realized mental health issues were a very real constraint there, and they were problematic for sure. But the actual academic performance in many cases flourished during the pandemic, in my experience. Okay. So let me go through some early results that I saw, and I apologize, the computer very sensitive there, so it skipped forward a few times. But that was my summary statement, was I don't see a problem here. So I'll show you some comparative stats across my classes. If you see that the fall of 2019 is not presented, it's because I was on sabbatical that semester. So as you see there on this slide, we went fully remote after March 13th. We stopped with classes at March 7th, and then we had an extra week or so to make adjustments there, meetings and that kind of thing, as we scrambled to go fully remote. And then we've been back pretty much straight through, starting with the fall of 2020 face-to-face. Most of the time with mask. We just got rid of the mask requirement a few weeks back on campus for our classrooms. Okay. So here's a couple classes where you can kind of see the difference. And what was interesting about this is, of course, GPA marginally went upwards in the fall of 20, and then went even more upwards in the fall of 2021. And so you can see there that these adjustments to more flexibility in how you present the material, giving students more space to experience their learning objectives as they see fit, I think really paid dividends there. This was an interesting one in the global business strategies, where in the spring of 2020, it was very disruptive, in March. So right, around midterms, really, they had to adjust to remote learning, real shock to the system. And yet the average GPA went up, it went back down closer to what it had been very little difference between spring 21 and then pre-pandemic spring 2019. In principles of economics, you see that during that disruptive semester, 2.72 was the norm. It actually went up some in the fall of 2020. And then this was really interesting. I teach the capstone or senior seminar class, and you see the sample size tends to be high 20s to low 30s in the class. These are the percentile ranks. For a lot of reasons, 2019 was an outlier in a bad way. We were way down from what we normally are there. But if you see there, 2020, we roared back at 89th percentile overall. And then just a phenomenal result in 2021, despite the students all having to take the ETS exam remotely with a webcam proctor live, which is a pretty daunting experience. And yet they really flourished in that environment. 97th percentile overall, our best result since 2002. We started keeping stats on our ETS results in 1999 at NNU. There's good news from Inside Higher Ed. This was an article. I won't pull it up here, but you can read through it at your leisure there from late January 2022, that the concerns about online cheating during the pandemic have been reduced quite a bit. I think professors have become more savvy about how to limit searchability as one example, use of lockdown browsers, fine-tuning their time constraints to prevent looking up questions on another computer, that kind of thing. So I think that has really paid off. That was encouraging news to see. I had sensed this anecdotally myself, but to see it from Inside Higher Ed, I think that was encouraging. So that gives you a little flavor for what I did there. I want to open it up for questions now. That was my last slide, actually, there. So I will stop sharing at this time, see what kind of questions you have out there. All right, so I'm back.
So it looks like one of the first questions we have come in is, how did you actually eliminate the searchability of test questions?
That's a great question. I started just getting more creative in how I would do it. So the way I look at it is, how Googleable is a question, basically. And so I would think of a question that was traditionally asked in, say, my microeconomics course. And I'd say, okay, if I search this on Google, what would come up? And in some cases, of course, if you hadn't thought it through too closely, the answer could pop up, basically. Or the image could pop up that would allow you to answer the question easily on a graph. So then you have to start getting creative with how you structure the graphs in maybe unconventional ways, how you word the questions, coming up with obscure city names for places or people's names that aren't conventionally used in economics. And so there are a host of ways to do it. But I think, if you have a traditional question you've asked in the past, where it was proctored face-to-face on paper, that type of thing, try that. Just see, if I Google this, does the answer pretty much pop up, or does it get really close to the answer popping up initially on a quick search of Google, or is that not the case and it only provides some kind of broad insight on it via Google? So I think that would be, let Google kind of be the guideline there of how searchable it is. But yeah, just creativity in terms of presenting things in a different way, drawing on other fields. So if your core question is based on economics, maybe bringing in elements of history or sociology or something that don't obscure the economics content, but just enrich it, lessen the searchability, etc. So great question.
The next question we have in our chat box here is, was the link to that article on higher ed?
That was from insidehighered.com is the one. Yeah. So that it was from 28th of January 2022, the one that I linked there. And so yeah, it was focused on higher education, if that was the broader question. And I'm trying to think if it had dipped into some of the other elements, but the whole website is really focused primarily on higher education, the insidehighered.com site. So that was the focus there, and it was nice to see that professors' concerns had been mitigated somewhat as time's gone on.
I'm not seeing any other questions come in right now, but if anyone does have questions for Dr. Chaplin, please feel free to throw them in our Q&A box at the bottom. Oh, looks like we just had one come in.
Oh, excellent.
So can you please share the title of the article?
Yeah, I might be able to go back to it real quickly here. So let me call it up here, or let me just go back and see if I can get that up here from Inside Higher Ed. Okay. Concerns about online cheating decline is the title, and it's January 28th, 2022. A new survey found instructors are less concerned about students cheating in online courses than they were at the start of the pandemic, but experts say there is plenty to worry about. So there of course, there is still some concerns. And so that's kind of where we are at the moment. And yeah, this was all college instructors, survey of 2,800 college instructors. Yeah. So still have a ways to go. It is still a concern, so even though the concern's been lessened, it does still exist. So great question.
Looking, we don't have any more questions in the Q&A coming in, but if any of you who are participating would like to, please feel free to put them in the Q&A box at the bottom. We're happy to get those answered for you.
This is my favorite part of it. I really enjoy answering these kind of questions, talking about my own experiences here. It's been an eye-opener for me, as I'm sure it has been for many professors across all kinds of disciplines.
If anyone has any questions, please feel free to throw them in the Q&A box at the bottom. We're happy to answer anything, or if you want him, to go over something again that, you might have missed in the PowerPoint, whatever that might be, we are happy to go back and do that as well. You can just put that in the Q&A, again, QA box it down at the bottom.
And it can be pretty broad. It doesn't have to be specific to exactly what I presented on here.
So we have a question that just came in. Can you share an example of how to become creative with questions to make it difficult for students to look up online?
That is a great question. It's always challenging to kind of teach about creativity, right? Because you do tend to think it's an organic thing that comes from within, etc. So I'm trying to think of some best practices there. I think the first thing is asking yourself those tough questions as you pour over questions that you would have asked on an exam prior to the pandemic, right? So if you teach, and I'm going to go back to economics, that's my main field. Looking at that question, taking a hard look at it and asking yourself, is this something that somebody could look up with relative ease? So that would be the first thing. Then of course you can test it in that way. If you affirm that, yes, that's easily searchable, so to speak, that's where the creativity comes into play. It could be something where you feel like, I'm just going to add an element of historical context here, for example. So it could be something on like antitrust policy, what the rest of the world outside the US calls competition policy. And you're dealing with the particular implications of antitrust policy, and the traditional question is just too straightforward in that sense, too Googleable, to use that term again. Then you could maybe add an element. So that would be what I mentioned earlier about bringing in like historical context as a way of reducing searchability. If you use, I mean, a classic example in economics is the production possibilities frontier, where we use this, what's called the guns and butter diagram, where we just use the generic goods Y and X. So changing that up and saying there's tennis shoes on the one hand, there's spaghetti sauce on the other hand, something like that. And it gets the student out of that normal, mode of thinking, to where they, or to where something can just click, where they have seen it elsewhere, or they feel that's easily searchable, because tons of people would have posted practice questions using those conventional X and Y guns and butter variables. So those are a couple ways you could do it. But I think that drawing on other disciplines element, and then coming up with kind of whimsical, creative names for things, categories of goods and services that you use that are not the typical ones that would be easily searched via Google are the best way to go.
So we have had another question come in. I wonder if you can say a bit about cheating and the deficit perspective most instructors seem to ascribe to their students, i.e. students will cheat. Is there a way to move faculty away from this? How, if so, how?
Yeah, that is dangerous thinking. I don't want to assume students will cheat, right? They're, innocent until proven guilty, I think applies here as well. So I think I don't have a great answer for that one, because people have different mindsets, and those mindsets can be hard to change sometimes. I do think, even if you feel that most students will not choose to cheat, you do want to factor in that you don't want to make it easy for them to do so, right? So those are not mutually exclusive concepts. So, I think what you can do is be proactive in the sense of less searchability, time constraints, we use this Respondus lockdown browser in the Canvas system, learning management system. Those kind of constraints can really matter quite a bit, but you do have to give them the benefit of the doubt. If you've done all that, I think the other thing is take a hard look at, are you getting very unusual results, right? If you've increased the searchability or limited searchability, I should say, you've done all these things right, and yet you're still having problems. Maybe it's because you gave 4 hours for the people to take the exam, and it only had 30 multiple choice questions. They had plenty of time to really mull over things, call an expert, look things up, what have you. So you do have to limit it. I think presenting material like I'm doing here today, that shows that people can flourish in an environment even when you've done all you can to reduce the probability of cheating and all, and that you're not getting very abnormal results that would indicate cheating. I mean, one example would be if I had seen students that had been trending at 65% in the class go up to 95% plus on their exams in that spring 2020, because of course it was right in the middle of the semester really that we switched. That would have been telling. That was not the case at all. So in my experience, I can't say with authority nobody's cheated or anything, but I do. So it is in the back of my mind. It's a concern, but I try to be proactive, and then I look ex post at, are the results leading me to be suspicious? And luckily that has not been the case. I hope that answered the question. I know it was a bit roundabout, but if there's something more pointed you want me to address further, I can within that question.
So Monica, who asked the question, said, thank you. Research also suggests that something as simple as requiring students to complete an honesty pledge deters cheating for a large percentage of students. So that's a strategy in addition to those you've proposed.
Absolutely. And I do that not in a formal way, but I'll just remind them that there's, it's not open book, it's, this or that, there is a time constraint, respect the rules and guidelines. I expect everybody to abide by our academic integrity policy. But you're right, that's a good point. And, that would be something for our administration to ultimately decide upon. And I would back them up on that if they just said every student at the beginning of the semester has to sign a type of honesty pledge. We have, lifestyle agreements and all this that are pretty broad based. And so general academic integrity is there, but I like the idea of semester by semester commitments there in each class.
We don't have any other questions in right now, but I do have a question.
Sure.
How have you found students who might have, technical difficulties or, bad internet, things like that? How have you dealt with that in the past, dealing with COVID, with all of that happening? What have you found to be a good solution to those types of things?
Fantastic question. I was just talking about this recently with my students. It's interesting. Sometimes the old-fashioned way is the best way. And what I mean by that is just get an old Ethernet cable, and have a hardwire connection, because 90% plus of the issue I've had when students are taking online exams or whatever is the Wi-Fi gets dodgy in the dorms or whatever, bandwidth limitations, what have you. And so our learning center made a commitment to providing Ethernet cables for free during the spring of 2020. Again, I know that seems like going back to the dark ages for students, and they're like, what is this thing? But I encourage them, that sometimes that simplest solution is the way to go. It's the most dependable. I know when our students had to take the major field test, it's called the MFT in business, our seniors that I was talking about the results of earlier with the ETS exam, they encourage strongly the ETS exam administrators that you have a hardwire connection, that you use an Ethernet cable for these very reasons. And once again, that happened when they had to take it remotely with the webcam monitor and all that, the proctor. The only issues that arose were purely related to those who didn't take that advice and used Wi-Fi. So keep encouraging them to either, if you're going to use Wi-Fi, use it in a place with a history of stability with the connection and all. If maybe that's somewhere on campus versus at home. But I think even better still, have it hardwired, use an Ethernet cable.
Awesome. Thank you so much for
no problem. Yeah, that's an important one. And it's because I'm a bit old-fashioned in some ways, and I tend to like to look to the past for how people solve problems and all. So I think that solution seems to be a very simple, cheap, and effective one.
Absolutely, I agree. Do we have any other questions? We definitely have some time to take a few more questions. If you have anything else. Not seeing any questions come through right now, which might be a good thing that you've covered a lot of your stuff, but I'll keep it open for sure, and anyone can answer any questions. Do you have anything else to add, Dr. Chaplin, or anything else that you wanted to, focus in on? I know you already went through your presentation, but.
Right. I'd be curious with some of the attendees out there, just to flip the script a little bit with my own questions, just to see what kind of issues they have encountered, in their respective fields, those kinds of things, in terms of obviously online cheating, students struggling with mental health issues, the kind of support that they've needed there, where the professors have felt the need to, go the extra mile in those kinds of cases to talk people, through these tough times, that kind of thing, because that has been an issue. I've been pretty fortunate in that, we haven't had too many really dramatic cases there, but we've known some people did struggle, especially in the spring of 2020, just simple boredom in some cases, right? Cabin fever, etc. Was a challenge.
So it looks like we had Monica respond, and she said, my students have been really overwhelmed during COVID. So I've actually rethought the structure of my course.
Okay. Yeah, that's a good point. That's a good point. And that can mean many different things. But I think for me, that flexibility, I've been very glad that I implemented that change. It was a tough mental adjustment because I kind of mentioned earlier, I'm a bit old fashioned. I kind of like at a residential college, there's that expectation that, hey, you should be here. Don't take attendance too lightly, what have you. And I did have to let that go. And one reason that really proved to be valuable is when Omicron was really raging um, earlier in the semester, there were students who we were face to face with masks in the classroom, but they were still nervous, even still in that situation. And there could be all kinds of reasons for that. And they wanted to opt out. And I think there has not been a broad-based policy coming down from on high from administration that said everybody's got to be um, face to face, the attendance is mandatory, that kind of thing. It's been completely up to the professors. And I could sense that some of my students were being challenged in the sense that, some professors had different expectations than others in terms of being in class. I just completely opened that space up because I had students reach out that were concerned, and I had no problem accommodating that. And it would have been nice if the administration had made more of a blanket statement just to clarify that that grace needs to be given, across all circumstances, and without too much burden on the student. I think that grace would have been given if the student had written some formal appeal and given all their reasons. But I didn't want to get that involved with them. I took their word for it. They said they were uncomfortable with being there at that time, and I respected that. So I think that's an area where administration's just got to be savvy about that, and recognize that the treatment of attendance can be done very differently amongst faculty, and that can put students in a bit of a dilemma, right? If some of the faculty are accommodating that 100% and others are a little more reluctant to be as flexible on attendance.
And Monica responded and said, I think flexibility is critical. It's something I've always tried to be, but has been particularly important over the last couple of years.
Yeah, great point. Great point. And luckily in my case, and this is why I'd encourage other people to track their results as I did, and you saw the results there in the presentation earlier, is it gives you some real substance to justify that flexibility. If my results had tanked, might have felt differently. I said, geez, I got flexible and people exploited it and underperformed. If that had happened, I would have had to really rethink my commitment to flexibility at that point. Luckily, that was not the case at all. The flexibility seemed to pay off nicely in every way. Our outcomes, broadly speaking, not just in my own classes, which you saw earlier in the presentation, but just broadly speaking in our whole College of Business, in terms of the kind of jobs and internships students are getting, have been absolutely fantastic. So nothing that I have seen has suffered whatsoever as a result of professors being more flexible. I'm not including all professors, as I mentioned, some have, taken a hard line even still. And once we came back to campus, it was like the pandemic had never happened for some. I retained that flexibility, and some others have, and I'm glad I did.
And Monica agrees with you. She says, I'm a fan of firm but fair.
Excellent, excellent. Yeah, there was a former referee, Joe Cortez, out of Las Vegas, and boxing referee, that is, and that was his famous line. I'm firm but I'm fair, and I thought that's a good one. That's no pun intended, real punchy. So worked nicely.
Any other questions or anything else anyone wants to add to this conversation? This is a wonderful conversation. I think it's definitely important to have, especially now with things changing so much, and it doesn't seem like things are going to flex back to exactly how they were before.
Yeah, it doesn't. I think there are those who I'm in a state that is very red politically, hasn't really embraced the wearing of masks, that kind of stuff, all that robustly and all. And so there's a high percentage that seem to want to pretend as if the pandemic never happened, or if it did happen, it is completely over. And I certainly disagree. I think it's ongoing. And so I do think we've got to, be diligent, keep rethinking how we do things, remain flexible, respect if students, even into next year, are still wary about COVID and accommodating them.
We have about 10 minutes left in our presentation here. So we do have we do have one question that just came in. It says, you mentioned that some professors came back to campus as if COVID never happened. I hope that some will acknowledge that there are some strategies that they might bring into their current practice that they used during COVID.
Okay. I missed something in the middle there. So, okay, read that off one more time.
Yeah, of course. So let me get back to it. It says, you mentioned that some professors came back to campus as if COVID never happened. I hope that some will acknowledge that there are some strategies that they might bring into their current practice that they used during COVID.
Yeah, amen to that. Absolutely. Right. You'd hate to see them completely forget everything that they had to implement. They had no choice back in spring of 2020, and there's value there. Absolutely. I'd like to retain that same hope. I don't think it applies to all the faculty that I've seen come back. I do think some just, they parked that. They said, it was a pain. I didn't like it. I did what I had to do to keep my job, etc., and to finish out the semester. But the minute we had the chance to come back, even if it was with mask on and maybe not quite in the same way they would have liked, I'm back to, all the exams are in class, face-to-face on paper. I expect all the students to be there all the time. It's business as usual. Old habits do indeed die hard. So that's a great point, is, how much did people rehabituate to a new style of teaching and greater flexibility that was mandated of them in the spring of 2020. And I think it was a decent percentage. I really do. Just talking to my own colleagues in the College of Business and elsewhere on campus. But I don't get the sense it was everybody, certainly.
So we do have another question. So is the ratio of in-person to online courses offered on your campus the same as it was before spring 2020? Or is your campus offering more online and or hybrid modalities now? And how do you see the future of different course modalities offered moving on?
Okay, yeah, fantastic question. And I'll take that in different segments here. So the first part of it is that the ratio has not really changed. The students by and large have wanted to be back face to face as soon as possible. So that ratio really hasn't changed. In the College of Business, just over a long sweep of time, students, non-traditional students, so we have what's called a STEP program, which is degree completion for undergraduate, and then our MBA program, those students, the professional students, so to speak, have wanted to migrate towards online for a host of reasons for many, many years. So there's been a gradual move in that direction towards a higher percentage online. But for our traditional aged undergrads, that's not the case at all. No, we've kept the same ratio that we've always had. We limit for the traditional undergraduate students, unless there's unusual circumstances, one online class per semester. So if they're traditional undergrad, we expect them to be, face to face in everything else each semester, and that didn't change after the spring of 2020. In terms of more flexibility, kind of hybrid models, what I have seen in the College of Business specifically at NNU is a slightly more laid back approach towards how professors conduct the classroom. What I mean by that is offering more online activity, more hybrid activity. Maybe it's a faculty member is going to teach Monday, Wednesday face-to-face, and then do a hybrid or do an online class on Friday, right? And maybe Google Meet for more office hours, integrating that. I have done personally. I've moved one of my office hour days to Google Meet. The other ones are still face to face. That seems to be working pretty well. So the accommodation for that, which would have been unthinkable, to be honest, pre-pandemic, I think has been pretty good. I haven't chatted much with other faculty across campus. We get in our own silos, as you probably know all too well. But from the College of Business perspective, I've been inspired really by the increased accommodation of different teaching modalities that have been allowed for. We do have faculty as well that, for health constraints, if they were concerned about coming back to campus, or if they were caring for somebody with COVID, they could move completely online. So we have had cases of that, and kudos to the administration for accommodating that nicely. That puts a burden of proof on the professor and all, and they don't really go in encouraging it for everybody. But if you have legitimate reasons for it and you can establish those with the administration, they have shown an accommodating spirit there. So fantastic question. Loaded one. I had to kind of break it down. So different components there.
All right, we do have a few more minutes. So if you have any questions, feel free to throw them in now, and we'll make sure to hit on them as quickly as possible to get everyone's thoughts and questions in. So like I said, we have, I think, about 3 more minutes left until the end of this session. So if you have a question, we can go ahead and get that answered for you if you have any. No questions coming in so far. If you do have one, feel free to throw one in. Last few minutes, might as well get one in, right?
Absolutely. No cost to you.
Someone did say thank you for this fruitful conversation. I agree. It's been a wonderful conversation we've had here.
Oh, excellent. Yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah, I enjoy this part of the presentations the most, partly because you get a read on what's really going to help fellow faculty, for example, whereas you don't know that as well when you're just going through your own material. I try to guess as I presented on my own stuff, but I think it was really helpful to try to leave more space for this time.
Absolutely. So, and if there are any last minute questions, feel free to throw them in before we end our session today. I know we have talked about a lot. There's been a lot of wonderful questions. So if anyone does have one last one to throw in there, please feel free to do so.
Yeah, I must say I'm really proud of how my students have coped with it in general and made the adjustments. You could see, especially in the spring of 20, when they were forced to go remote and it was a scramble. You can see it wearing on them, but they really hung in there, and the actual academic results, and partly, perhaps because of just boredom, right? They were that spring of 2020 was rough, and there were students who, and depending on where they lived, often were restricted where they could go even and all. So they maybe felt like, what else am I going to do? I'm home, can't go out much, might as well hunker down. So they performed pretty well, given that it was a really challenging time.
Absolutely. So not seeing any other questions in, we have about another minute, probably a little bit less than a minute. So if you have one, feel free to throw one in real quick, but otherwise might be time to start wrapping up. So we'll go ahead, we can wrap up. It seems like our questions have dwindled off, which is totally fine. We had a lot of great ones in there, and thank you so much for all of you guys' great conversations that came out of that. But thank you so much, Dr. Chaplin, for all the valuable information you shared with us today and all of your thoughts on COVID and changing things up as the school year came around. But the next concurrent session will begin at 1 p.m. Eastern time. I've gone ahead, I'll throw it in there. I've put in the chat the links to access our conference website for a complete list of the other concurrent sessions in their disciplines. So while accessing the conference website, don't forget to swing by the exhibit hall to say hello to the Hawks team. You'll be able to view a quick 5-minute demonstration and be entered to win the hourly giveaway. And that would be your choice of a 6-month subscription to Audible, 1-year subscription to Disney Plus, or a $100 Amazon gift card, which is all really exciting stuff. So we will see you at your next session. And thank you again, Dr. Chaplin, for your awesome presentation this afternoon.
Much appreciated, Daisy. I appreciate all you guys do. Sounds like there are some great prizes on offer, by the way. So that sounds fantastic too. So I really enjoyed myself a lot. Anytime, just reach out. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you guys so much. Thank you, Dr. Chaplin. Hope to see you again soon.
Indeed. Me too. All the best.
Have a good one. Bye.